Good afternoon, everyone. Let's start with a new topic Indian political thought, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. So, the legacy of Sir Syed Ahmed Khan it starts with the upheaval of 19th century when the British East India Company had formally established its rule. And it was also the time that Mughal Empire had been completely collapsed. And because of this situation, this transition, the Muslim elites of that time they were in a position in which they held nothing, no power, no wealth, no influence, and they were struggling to understand their place in this new British controlled society. And it was at that time that Sir Syed Ahmed Khan was born. So he was born in 1870 in Delhi into a respected family with a strong connection to Mughal nobility. And in his earlier life, Ahmed Khan he learned Persian, Arabic, and Islamic law. And as he grew up, he witnessed the sharp decline of Mughal aristocracy and the rising power of British. And his job as a judge in the British East India Company's legal system, it gave him a rare opportunity to see how the British govern, how their laws work, and how the education system function. But coupled with it, he also saw a new rising trend, a trend that worried him, that the Hindus of the Bengal province, the then Bengal province, they quickly adapted to Western education, law, and politics, and employed themselves in coveted British position. On the other hand, Muslim of the time, they they still clung to their old belief. They registered change and stayed backward. So this rise of the new Bengali Hindu middle class, known as Bhadralok, it showed how embracing modern education could help a community gain influence and progress under British rule. But the Muslims of that time they were fearful of losing their tradition, and because of that attitude, they fell deeper into isolation and poverty. So this gap, this growing inequality between the Hindus and Muslim, it worried Sir Syed not because it was about jobs or wealth, but it was about the very survival of Muslim as a respected community in India. And at the same time, the world was also changing fast. The industrial revolution, it was transforming economy, and new scientific idea like Darwin's theory of evolution, they were also challenging religious beliefs everywhere. And in India, many reformers such as Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Jyotiba Phule, all were leading movements to modernize Hindu society and to fight social evils like sati, to promote Western education, whereas the Muslim modernism it was nowhere to be seen. So this realization it pushed Sir Syed towards pragmatic modernism, the idea that Muslim should not fight the British but should learn from them, adapt with them, and find ways to succeed under the new British control system. And coupled with it, Sir Syed also believed that if Islam is properly understood, it was fully compatible with modern science and rationality. So his early work, Asar us Sanadid, which detailed the monuments and history of Delhi, it reflected his deep love for Muslim heritage. Then, through his writings and work, Sir Syed urged his fellow Muslims to stop fearing change. And he urged them that Muslims should embrace modern subjects like science, technology, and English. And it was not to abandon their faith, but to strengthen their place in this modern world. Finally, as a historian, Wilfred Cantwell Smith noted, it is a case study and a scholarly view, and his analysis of Sir Syed's work. He said Sir Syed's greatest vision was his greatest strength was his vision. He was able to see that survival for Indian Muslims it depended not on resisting change but on learning to adapt. So Smith he highlighted the pragmatic approach adopted by Sir Syed, which was about survival and continuity of Muslims as a respected community in modern India. Now, this early phase of intellectual awakening It shaped Sir Sayyid's lifelong mission, and it gave birth to his larger political thought and led him to work towards social, educational, and political upliftment of Indian Muslims. He became a pioneer of Muslim modernism in India. Now let's look at the role of 1857 in catalyzing the political realism of Sir Syed. So the revolt of 1857 was not just was a major turning point in the life of Sir Syed Ahmed Khan's political thought. So this rebellion of 1857, it was triggered by multiple factors such as resentment over British policies, religious anger, economic exploitation, and general feeling of betrayal among both Hindus and Muslims. And those who are not aware of this, let's have a quick background of 1857. So 1857, to proceed on to that, you must have a look at the chain of events that led to creation of this pressure, this rebellion, this anger. So these chain of events, it started with the 1757 Battle of Plassey. So by this battle, British, they got the Diwani rights of the largest province of that time. And the second battle, the 1764, it led to the final extinguishing of any Mughal or provincial authority or Mughal or provincial aristocracy that stood before the British, especially in terms of revenue collection. Uh, Revenue, it's like tax. And as you know, at the heart of everything is trade and taxation, trade and money. पैसा होगा तभी एम्पायर होंगे, पैसा होगा तभी वॉर होंगे, पैसा होगा तभी इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन होगी, पैसा होगा तभी कैपिटलिज्म होगा. एंड इट इज़ the money, it is the revenue that fuels everything. So from 1757 to 1764, the British, they came to control the majority of revenue dominated area. फिर उसके बाद कुछ धीरे धीरे जो बाकी वॉर स्टार्ट हुए, लाइक द वॉर विद मराठाज, द कार्नेटिक वॉर्स, द एंग्लो-सिख वॉर. धीरे धीरे the British, they started defeating all the major powers at that time, और धीरे धीरे पूरा इंडिया उनके कंट्रोल में आता गया. Then 1773 में the British East India Company, they started making rules about the governance of India. That started with 1773 Regulating Act. फिर उसके बाद बहुत सारे एक्ट आए, और सारे एक्ट जो थे, they were there to strengthen their presence, strengthen their grip over the revenue and administration of India. फिर बहुत सारे जो rules हैं उनके, especially regarding governance and revenue collection, they were heartless and they catered only to the British needs, such as उनके sunset laws देख लेते हैं, उनके permanent settlement system को देख लेते हैं. So each of these economic policies, they were there to extract as much revenue as possible. It is about extraction, exploitation, extortion. So they did not care about what Indians felt. All they care about that जितना resource extract हो सके, and फिर सारा का सारा resources जो हैं could be shipped to the factories, the great factories that fueled the industrial revolution in England. And moreover, they saw that Indians were mired in their customs. Indians were deeply stuck in their society, in their societal rules. This societal quagmire like daldal. So इस दलदल में सब फंसे हुए थे. This perception was shared by most of the British rulers. So according to them, they could not help it. All they could do is to extract the revenue and see their own prosperity rising. So इस कारण से they started neglecting Indian affairs, especially the social and economic affairs. फिर उसके बाद कुछ रिलीजियस सेंटिमेंट्स जो थे उनके साथ भी दे स्टार्टेड टैम्परिंग, सच एज इससे पहले जो कास्ट सेग्रीगेशंस होते थे, जो रिलीजियस सेग्रीगेशंस होते जो जो पहले के रूलर्स जो हैं दे यूजुअली मेंटेन, बट ब्रिटिश ने आते ही दे स्टार्टेड ओवरलुकिंग everything that concerned the societal, the ritualistic Indian drama. They started overlooking the social and religious practices. और उसकी वजह से रिसेंटमेंट जो है इंडियन पॉपुलेशन में बढ़ता गया। फिर उसके बाद जो आपको जो रेवेन्यू पॉलिसीज़ बताई अबाउट एक्सट्रैक्शन, तो इन रेवेन्यू पॉलिसीज़ में भी परमानेंट सेटलमेंट हो गया, फिर रैयतवाड़ी हो गया, महलवाड़ी हो गया, जितने भी जो सेटलमेंट्स थे। रेवेन्यू सेटलमेंट मीन्स कि किसी पीस ऑफ लैंड से रेवेन्यू किस रेट पे लिया जाए और किस मेथड से लिया जाए। सो इन सब की वजह से भी बहुत सारे ज़मींदार जो थे दे सॉ देयर प्रॉपर्टीज बीइंग ऑक्शन। एक तो ये है। फिर जितने भी स्टैब्लिश्ड रूलर्स एंड सेमी रूलर्स थे, या कह सकते हैं जितने भी ओल्ड इंडियन एरिस्टोक्रेट्स थे, उनकी पावर जो है धीरे धीरे इट वाज बीइंग स्नैच, एंड सारी पावर जो है रेवेन्यू कलेक्टर्स जो हैं जिसके लिए आप प्रिपेयर कर रहे हैं उनको दी जाने लगी। सो इस कारण से एरिस्टोक्रेट जो हैं उनकी ज़मीन भी गई, उनकी पावर भी गई, एंड उनका इन्फ्लुएंस भी गया। सो ये एक और रिसाइनमेंट था। फिर रिलीजियस पॉलिसीज़ में जो ब्रिटिश जो थे they started employing the Indian people in the lower hierarchy of military, lower hierarchy of army and military. अब इसमें फर्स्ट रिजाइनमेंट उनका ये था कि एक तो यहाँ पे एक तरह से डिस्क्रिमिनेशन होता था। there used to be a discrimination between the white masters, the white officers and the Indian sepoys, इंडियन सोल्जर्स। तो फर्स्ट तो ये था जो पे को लेकर था, फूड को लेकर था, बिहेवियर को लेकर था। उसके बाद जितने भी इस आर्मी और मिलिट्री के अंदर जितने भी इंडियन थे, उनके ही रिश्तेदार जो है इन बाकी जगह पे थे, और वहाँ पे जो इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसीज़ थी अबाउट रिसोर्स एक्सट्रैक्शन, जिसकी वजह से न सिर्फ एरिस्टोक्रेट जो है उनको प्रॉब्लम हुई, बट द होल कॉटेज इंडस्ट्री वॉज इन डिस्ट्रॉयड। फिर उनके जो अनटेनेबल रेवेन्यू एक्सट्रैक्शन की वजह से कितनी ही जो प्रॉपर्टीज़ जो हैं, कितने ही फार्मर्स जो हैं, उनको भी अपनी जो हाउस होल्ड इनकम जो है इट स्टार्टेड ड्विंडलिंग। उनके जो एंटरप्राइजेज हैं, वेदर अबाउट एग्रीकल्चर, वेदर अबाउट कॉटेज इंडस्ट्री, वो भी डिस्ट्रॉय हो गए। तो ये धीरे धीरे ये उनके कंसर्न भी जो है इन तक पहुंचते ही थे। तो इस तरह से हर जगह पे ये रिसाइनमेंट स्टार्ट हो गया। फिर उसके बाद धीरे धीरे आते हैं जो इनकी पॉलिसीज़ देखते हैं, लाइक लॉर्ड डलहौजी की पॉलिसीज़ देखते हैं। लॉर्ड डलहौजी से पहले 1980 में वेलेस्ली की पॉलिसी देख लेते हैं। सो वेलेस्ली स्टार्टेड द सब्सिडियरी अलायंस। तो सब्सिडियरी अलायंस में क्या है कि जितने भी उस टाइम के प्रिंसली स्टेट्स एंड रूलर्स थे, जो लोकल रूलर्स थे, उनकी जो आर्मी थी, देयर आर्मी इट वाज डिस्बैंडेड, और उनके कोर्ट में एक ब्रिटिश रेजिडेंट वाज स्टैब्लिश। तो एक तरह से ये एक सर्वेलेंस सिस्टम हो गया, एंड दे वर अंडर द प्रोटेक्टोरेट ऑफ द ब्रिटिश। तो ये आप समझ सकते हैं सब्सिडियरी अलायंस में कि कोई भी प्रिंसली स्टेट दे कैन नॉट मेंटेन देयर ओन आर्मी, और फिर जो आर्मी है इट विल बी मेंटेन बाय द ब्रिटिश, एंड बट उसका जो मेंटेनेंस चार्जेस हैं इट विल बी पेड फ्रॉम द कॉफर्स, फ्रॉम द ट्रेजरीज ऑफ इंडिविजुअल प्रिंसली स्टेट्स। फिर दोज प्रिंसली स्टेट दे वर अंडर डायरेक्ट प्रोटेक्शन ऑफ द ब्रिटिश। सो दिस डायरेक्ट प्रोटेक्शन it was a kind of surveillance measure, क्योंकि एक तरह से उनकी आर्मी जो है वो उनके पास नहीं है, सो दे कैन नॉट गो फॉर एनी कैंपेन। वो ब्रिटिश के खिलाफ किसी रिवॉल्ट में खड़े नहीं हो सकते, सेकंड, उनके कोर्ट में एक ब्रिटिश रेजिडेंट होता था, तो जो भी जितने भी मैटर्स हैं स्पेशली रिगार्डिंग फॉरेन रिलेशंस, प्रिंसली स्टेट के कंसर्न में फॉरेन रिलेशन मतलब किसी दूसरे प्रिंसली स्टेट से या किसी और अदर यूरोपियन पावर से भी जो कॉन्टैक्ट हैं, दे यूज टू गो वाया दिस रेजिडेंट. सो रेजिडेंट को सब पता होता है. इट मीन्स ब्रिटिश, they had a keen oversight over them. They acted like a watchdog, a big brother. So इस ये पॉलिसी जो है इसके कारण भी जो प्रिंसली स्टेट्स है, दे लॉस्ट एवरीथिंग, दे लॉस्ट पावर, वेल्थ, इन्फ्लुएंस. एंड उसके बाद लॉर्ड डलहौजी की डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ लैप्स. सो डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ लैप्स वाज नथिंग but to subjugate the rest of the princely state under the dominion, under the protectorate, under the sovereignty of British Empire. So इस डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ लैप्स के भी कंडीशंस कुछ ऐसे ही थे, कंडीशंस विच वर प्रोन टू एरर. जैसे अगर मेल आयर नहीं है तो वो प्रिंसली स्टेट, वो पॉपुलेशन जो है, दे वुड कम डायरेक्टली अंडर द कंट्रोल ऑफ ब्रिटिश. सो जो झांसी की रानी जो केस जो है, सो लक्ष्मीबाई वाला, वो सिमिलर केस है कि मेल आयर नहीं था, तो द ब्रिटिश दे अक्वायर्ड दिस प्रिंसली स्टेट. और वैसे ही धीरे धीरे बाकी स्टेट में भी, लाइक सतारा हो गया, उदयपुर हो गया, तो ये सारे भी धीरे धीरे अवध हो गया. So this doctrine of lapse, it was another attempt to acquire the Indian princely state and to make them comply with the British law. And the final nail in the coffin, जो आप बहुत बार देखते हैं, about the grease cartridges. So the grease cartridges, it is more about, it's more like the final spark on a heap of ammunition. So ये जितने फैक्टर्स बताए, सो वो प्रेशर वैक्यूम, वो जो प्रेशर है, जो प्रेशर कुकर है, इट वाज ऑलरेडी प्रिपेयर, द हीप ऑफ एम्यूनेशन वाज ऑलरेडी देयर, बट एक स्पार्क की ज़रूरत थी, एंड दैट स्पार्क वाज प्रोवाइडेड बाय दीज कार्ट्रिजेस. सो ये है कि उस वक्त की जो राइफल्स थी, अ काइंड ऑफ मस्केट्स, जिनको एनफील्ड राइफल बोलते हैं, सो उन राइफल्स के अंदर जो एम्यूनेशन होता था, बारूद जो बोलते हैं, इट वॉज केप्ट इन सिलेंड्रिकल सेल्स, मेटल सेल्स, उनके अंदर रखा जाता, और उसके ऊपर एक ग्रीस लगाया जाता, एक फैट लगाया जाता, ताकि जो एम्यूनेशन है, मे बी अमोनियम पोटेशियम नाइट्रेट, किसी भी सेम कॉम्बिनेशन, नाइट्रेट्स का ही कॉम्बिनेशन है. सो ये जो एम्यूनेशन है, ये एयर के कांटेक्ट में नहीं है, तो उसको सील करने के लिए फैट यूज़ होता था. अब दिस र्यूमर, इट मेड द राउंड दैट ये जो ग्रीस कार्ट्रिजेस हैं, या जो ये जो फैट है, जो कैप है, इट इज़ मेड अप ऑफ फैट ऑफ cow and pigs. So this rumor, I don't know if it was true, and nobody can be sure about whether the cartridges that were used वो इनके फैट से बनी थी या कोई आर्टिफिशियल था. बट द प्रॉब्लम वॉज दैट इस कार्ट्रिज को, इस एम्यूनेशन को उस राइफल के अंदर भरने के लिए इस जो ग्रीस है, इसको मुंह से खोलना पड़ता. एंड हियर केम द प्रॉब्लम, एंड हियर स्टार्टेड द र्यूमर कि ये अगर ग्रीस कार्ट्रिज जो है, ये जो ग्रीस कैप है, ये अगर फैट काउ या पिग का है, देन इट गॉट रिलीजियस एंगल हियर. एंड इसके साथ ही द मच नीडेड स्पार्क, it came into full force, it exploded the situation, and that's how the 1857 revolt, it became a nightmare for the East India Company. So all in all, जितने भी factors हैं, I have explained all the factors in detail. The resentment over British policies, religious anger, economic exploitation, and feeling of betrayal among both Hindus and Muslims. So जितने भी जो reasons हैं, started with the Battle of Plassey, all have been explained. The result was that the rebellion was crushed brutally, and the Mughal Empire, it was finally abolished around 1858. जो लास्ट मुगल एम्परर थे बहादुर शाह जफर, उनको फिर they were expelled from India. And जो वहाँ पे रह रहे थे the Muslim community, the aftermath was devastating, and the British believed that the Muslim, they were the main conspirator because of because of their past rule, because they belonged to the Muslim nobility, and as a punishment they were kept out of government job, army, and educational institution. And many Muslims, they lost their land, and they further were pushed into poverty and backwardness. And Sir Syed, who was working as a judge during this time, he saw this destruction up close. And Delhi, that was the heart of Muslim culture at the time, it was turned into ruins. Thousands were killed, properties looted, and fear of extinction haunted the Muslim elite. And this close up experience with the onset and consequences of the revolt, it made Sir Syed realize that armed rebellion was futile. And he began to believe that the practical side would be that the Muslim, they should adapt with it. They should adapt with the new masters, and they should remain loyal to them. And in his famous pamphlet, Asbab Bagawat-e-Hind, Cause of the Indian Revolt in 1859, he boldly analyzed why the revolt had happened, and he pointed out failures of both the British and the Indian people, and he argued that British policies had ignored the tradition and sentiments of the Indian, causing deep alienation, while Indian too, they lacked unity and understanding of the modern world. So the gist was about the 1857. I also share the same sentiment that it was a double-edged sword. It was caused by both the British and Indian neglect. So British, they neglected Indian tradition, and Indians, they neglected modernity. So it was after 1857 that Sir Syed's mission became clear: to rebuild the shattered confidence of Muslims, push them towards English education, and prepare them to engage with the modern governance and science. And he often said, the life of nations depends on education. Education is the only cure for the ills of my community. And one powerful case study for this period was his personal relationship with the British officials, because he worked as a judge. Sir Syed worked closely with many colonial officers to ensure that Muslim interests were protected. And he believed that political survival of Muslims is depending on negotiating space within the new colonial system, not fighting it blindly, not revolting against it. So this revolt was a big wake-up call for Sir Syed, and as a matter of scholarly view, so G.W. Leitner, he said Sir Syed was the first Muslim leader who understood that the pen, not the sword, would shape the destiny of Indian Muslims in the modern age. Now, let's have a look at the education reform undertook by Sir Syed. So, he did not see modern education as threat to Islam. Instead, he argued that Islam encouraged learning, reasoning, and intellectual progress. And according to him, the Quran itself inspired humans to study nature and the universe, and which perfectly aligns with the modern scientific inquiry. And to make this true, or to make this happen, he decided to build institutions that would train Indian Muslim youth in this modern knowledge. And for that matter, he in 1875 he led the foundation of Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College at Aligarh, which later became Aligarh Muslim University. And he designed the curriculum to reflect the modern subjects such as mathematics, science, history, law, and political science, along with offering courses in Islamic studies, Urdu, Arabic, and Persian. A powerful study come from how Aligarh College it created a new class of educated Muslim professionals, lawyers, judges, teachers, and bureaucrats who began playing an active role in Indian politics and society. And many later leaders of All India Muslim League, even founder of today's Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, they were influenced by this Aligarh modernism. However, Sir Syed also faced criticism from the orthodox section of Muslim community who accused him of promoting Western culture and undermining Islam. But he stood firm and argued that ignorance was far bigger threat to Islam than modern education. Then another remarkable initiative was his role in the starting of Scientific Society of Aligarh in 1864. And this society it translated important scientific work from English into Urdu so that knowledge could reach ordinary Muslims. Then he published Tehjeeb al-Akhlaq, The Refinement of Morals, a journal that became a platform to discuss many pressing issues such as social reforms, women's rights, education, and modern idea. And he openly attacked outdated customs. And one such important case study is appeal for women's education. And he argued that the Muslim community could not progress if half of its population remained uneducated. Now let's have a look at political thought and communal consciousness of Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. So ये तो अभी तक देख चुके थे कि it was the 1857 which was a wake-up call, a turning point in his life. And he also recognized that rising Hindu middle class, the Bhadralok, they benefited from English education and early engagement with British institutions. So they were moving ahead, whereas the Muslim community was lagging behind. And this led to his famous political stance against Indian National Congress. He opposed Indian National Congress and believed that in a country where Hindu outnumbered Muslim, any political system that is based on one man, one vote, it would reduce Muslim to permanent political minorities. And he also believed that any such political party that is manned by or that has a majority of Hindus, it cannot address the concern of Muslim. In 1888, during a speech in Mir, he famously declared that Hindus and Muslims are two separate nations, as different in religious customs and social habits. And some historians, such as R.J. Moore, they argued that this was the earliest expression of the two-nation theory. But he did not advocate for partition. His focus was more on protecting Muslim identity and interest within a united India. Then he also used his influence as a judge to negotiate with the British on behalf of Muslims. He worked to ensure that Muslim representation in government job and education was maintained. He emphasized the need for separate electorate for Muslims, and this demand, both of this, they became the key demands for all India Muslim Leagues later. And in the words of a famous scholar, Barbara Metcalfe, she explains that Sir Syed's political realism was shaped by his understanding of British politics. He saw that the British cared about numbers, influence, and loyalty. So he urged Muslims to show loyalty to the British Crown not out of love, but as a pragmatic strategy to secure their interests. And his famous line, "Our future, it depends on good relations with the British." Then his writings in general, in journals like Tehjeeb al-Akhlaq, It urged Muslims to engage with modern politics, rationality, and strategic thinking. Then, one important case study overall in his political thought was the Hindi Urdu controversy of 1860s. So, among Hindus, demands grew to replace Urdu with Hindi in official work. But Sir Syed, he defended Urdu, saying that losing Urdu would mean losing a vital part of Muslim heritage. Then, despite these positions, it would be unfair to label Sir Syed as a communal or anti-Hindu. In his speeches and writing, he stated that he sought cooperation between Hindu and Muslim, but he was more concerned about the Muslim interests to uh, make them adjust or make them adapt in the modern world. And he was not creating any divided India. He did not talk of partition. He did not uh, wanted any violence against Hindu or the British. All his focus was the progress of Muslim community. Then a scholarly view. So Mushirul Hasan, he said, the Sir Sayyid was trying to strike a balance between integration and separate identity. And ultimately, Sir Sayyid's political consciousness it led the foundation of modern Muslim political identity in India, and it shaped key players in Indian politics from Muhammad Ali Jinnah to Muslim League's leadership. Now, his controversial stance about loyalty to the British and later his constitutional negotiation. So, this aspect was always debated and is still being debated about Sir Syed's clear advocacy, straight advocacy for loyalty to the British Crown. And it was not just about that वो खुद ब्रिटिश के लॉयल हैं. He was also urging all the Muslim to stay loyal to the British Crown. So it was not out of admiration or personal gain. It was a strategic maneuver, a strategic calculation that was rooted in the harsh lessons of 1857 revolt and all the consequences of that time that convinced Sir Syed that confrontation would only invite disaster for the community. And he believed that cooperation with the colonial ruler was the only way for Muslims to secure their survival and progress. And his loyalty did not mean that Sir Syed accepted British rule uncritically. In fact, he was one of the earliest Indian thinkers to engage in constitutional negotiation. So you can see the practical side, the pragmatic side here, that in return for the loyalty, he was seeking constitutional actions and benefits from the British. So he demanded fair treatment for Muslim within the colonial system, and he argued that since Muslim had ruled India for centuries, they should be considered a distinct political community that deserves special rights and protection. And herein lies many of the later constitutional demands that he sought in exchange for loyalty. And a later case study was the response to the Indian Council Act of 1861 and later 1892. Here, Sir Syed actively engaged with the British to ensure that Muslim representation in legislative council was not neglected. So you can see here uh, the practical side. Then his engagement with the constitutional matter became more evident when he opposed the Indian National Congress. So the reason for is that he said that any democracy in India that is based on majority rule, it would lead that Hindu would dominate the Muslim, and the Muslims would be reduced to a voiceless minority. And in a famous speech at Lucknow in 1887, he declared, in all matters where our interests clash, the two communities must be considered separate. But when they meet, they should act together as one. So this statement, it reflects a dual approach. First, he is talking about the conflict of interest. Then, he also urging the two community to stand together. So here, this dual approach it seeks collaboration where possible, but advocates for separate identity in matters of political representation and rights. Then his loyalty to the British had another dimension. It allowed him to open doors for Muslim youth to enter government services. That is, he was seeking many constitutional and many government benefits in exchange for the loyalty. And by promoting English education and because of the loyalty, he created a class of Muslim bureaucrats, lawyers, and professionals who became later important Muslim political players. This strategy bore fruit when later British recognized Muslim as a separate political community and introduced separate electorate in parliamentary reforms of 1909. However, his loyalty towards British it also attracted criticism. Orthodox Muslim they called him a stooge of the British, whereas Congress leaders they saw him a barrier to national unity. But he remained firm. He argued that loyalty was a means to an end. And the end was Muslim survival and prosperity. So, means to an end is a phrase which means the way, rasta. So, this his practical element of loyalty was that he cared about Muslim survival and prosperity, and this end goal it had this way, which was loyalty. So loyalty for him it was necessary. The way can be compared with a necessity, a means to an end. So loyalty was necessary for Muslim survival and prosperity, and he believed that cooperation was wiser than confrontation. And in the words of Musirul Hassan, Sir Syed was the first Muslim leader who realized the importance of constitutional politics and strategic engagement with the colonial power, a model that shaped Muslim politics for decades. Now let's have a look at the rational interpretation of Islam and Quran done by Sir Syed. So his political and social thought it bridged Islam with modern science and rational thinking, and he believed that Muslims are backward not because of political or economic reason, but because of the intellectual backwardness, because of their rigid traditionalism, because they are still clinging to the old ways. And he strongly argued that Islam, when correctly understood, it was his interpretation of Islam, that in that way, Islam would not oppose reason or science. And he urged that Quran itself encouraged inquiry, observation, and pursuit of knowledge. And referring to the golden age of Islamic civilization, he wrote that early Muslim scholars they excelled in philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine because they embraced reason. However, over time, Muslims they fell into blind imitation, taqlid, and lost their creative and scientific spirit. So this golden age of Islamic civilization, it started just a few years after the establishment of Khalifa system, and uske baad many eminent Muslim personality in Saudi Arabia, in Persia, in modern Turkey, which was at the time known as Ottoman Empire. So उस वक्त जितने भी Islamic scholars हुए, all of them they rested their soul on rationality. However, his magnus opus, the Asar Sanadid, which is an interpretation of Quran, it no, not just interpretation of Quran. It is about the Muslim heritage in India. So it is a historical and architectural work on Delhi that reflected his deep interest in documenting knowledge scientifically. And later, his journal Tahjeeb al-Akhlaq, the improvement of morals, he promoted rational debates on religious, social and scientific issue. So ये जो journal है जो बार बार आ रहा है, so this journal it urged the Muslim to engage in rationality, in scientific thinking, in opposing social customs, in opposing the orthodox and obsolete rituals, and engage into scientific bend of mind. And he urged Muslim to think critically about outdated custom and superstition. So ये वाला element जो है वो यहाँ आ गया. Then his a key example of his rational approach was his commentary on the Quran. So ये है interpretation, tafsir al Quran, and here this असर उस सनादिब ये है जो दिल्ली की मुस्लिम हेरिटेज के बारे में है, जो आर्किटेक्चरल और मोनूमेंटल हेरिटेज के बारे में. So here, so this commentary on Quran, Tafsir al-Quran, by this work he argued that Quran must be interpreted in the light of reason and changing time. Interpretation means to read it while analyzing it. And this interpretation rejected literal interpretations that clashed with science. And instead he advocated that if any verse of Quran, if it contradicts with scientific knowledge, then it should be re-examined and understood metaphorically. So यहाँ पे आप देख सकते हैं कि his interpretation about Quran, it itself urged all to view Quran via the lens of science, via the lens of rationality and reason. Without reason, the study of Quran would be a futile affair. And his famous statement, whatever is established by reason and science cannot be against the Quran, for the Quran itself is based on reason. One important case study that reflects his scientific temperament was his reaction to Darwin's theory of evolution. और ये आप समझ सकते हैं कि I'm talking about the age of 1890 or the early 20th century. उस वक्त पे डार्विन की जो थियोरी है it was not acceptable to the European scholars. So Indian Muslim scholars, traditional Muslim scholars, आप समझ सकते हैं कि they had outrightly rejected it. But Sir Syed approached it with an open mind. And he wrote that evolution, it did not necessarily contradict Islamic teaching. So you can see आज के टाइम में भी in 2025 बहुत सारे लोग डार्विन्स की थियरी को they do not accept it. Even if they go by it, they do not accept it wholeheartedly. तो आज के 100 साल पहले somebody tried to approach it with an open mind. Somebody tried to build bridges with this you can say a miraculous theory at that time. So he said that evolution do not contradict, do not clash with Islamic teaching if understood properly. And this reflected his belief that religion and science, they were not enemies but two ways of understanding the same truth. Next, Sir Syed also applied rational thinking to social custom. He criticized Parda, veil system, excessive dowries, and lavish weddings, calling them un-Islamic and harmful to Muslim progress. And he argued that so many religious practices, they were actually cultural addition, they had no basis in Islam. And his scientific outlook also shaped the curriculum of Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, AMU, Aligarh Muslim University. So unlike traditional madrasa, Aligarh taught modern science, Western philosophy, mathematics, and English literature along with Islamic studies, which produced a generation of Muslim professionals, scientists, thinkers, bureaucrats, teachers. However, his ideas were not universally accepted. Many Orthodox scholars, they accuse Sir Syed of distorting Islam and being a British puppet. Then let's have a look at legacy, significance, and relevance of his thought in Indian politics. So his legacy remains monumental in the journey of Indian political thought, especially regarding protection of Muslim identity and promotion of education, modernity, reasoning, and minority rights among them. And he was the first thinker to conceptualize Muslim as a distinct political community with distinct cultural, religious, and historical roots. He believed that Muslims were not a religious group but a Qawm, a nation within India. As this thinking, it was an intellectual seed that later sprouted in the form of two nation theory. But he did not advocate partition. His, he was more concerned about protection of Muslim interests within a united India. And finally, his legacy is most visible in the establishment of contemporary Aligarh Muslim University. This institution, it became the cradle of Muslim political consciousness in India, and many prominent leaders of Pakistani movement and later secular Muslim voices, they were educated here. Now the next important case study is the role of AMU graduates in constitutional debate during British India. So many leaders that were came out of AMU, such as Syed Mahmud, Syed Amir Ali, and Liaquat Ali Khan. They carried forward Sir Syed policies of constitutional negotiation, minority rights, and pragmatic cooperation. Then, Sir Syed also contributed to the debate on secularism and pluralism in India. He recognized that Indian society is of plural nature, but he also warned against majoritarian politics, the rule of majority. So his refusal to join Indian National Congress, it stemmed from his fear that a single majority-driven political platform, that is Indian National Congress, it would overlook and ignore minority rights. Another critical legacy of Sir Syed is his promotion of scientific temper and rationality. So he connected Islam with modern science and laid the foundation of Muslim modernism in South Asia. And he insisted that religion should not conflict with reason, and if it does, it should be re examined without any blind superstition. And so this spirit of scientific modernity, it influenced later movements such as Deoband School, Bareilly Reform, and even progressive Muslim writers of the 20th century. However, he was not without criticism. Orthodox Muslim scholars, they branded him westernized and un-Islamic as a stooge of the British, and Hindu leaders, they accuse him of dividing the nation. But historian like Aisa Jalal, she observed that Sir Syed was a product of his time and trying to save a community that saw itself sinking after 1857. So his strategy was about survival, not division. And his political thought, especially his pragmatic, practical loyalty to the British, it remains deeply debated. Yet, when we look back, it becomes clear that his approach, it allowed Indian Muslim to regain confidence, build institution, develop political strategy from the ashes of 1857. So this is it. Thank you very much, and kindly subscribe the channel. If you have any doubt, drop the comments.